Have you ever introduced your campaign's big villain just for your players to not care? This doesn't mean the villain is weak. It might just mean that the players haven't had time to care. Think about the greatest villains in fiction. Before the heroes have even met them, they've already felt their influence. They've heard stories about them. They've seen the destruction they can leave behind, and they have seen powerful allies fail against them. Today, I want to talk about 7 ways to build the presence of your BBEG throughout a campaign so that when the players fight them, they're not just fighting a stat block, they're fighting a legend. The easiest way to introduce a villain is to make the world talk about them. Buddy, quit hitting my microphone. I love you so much. Quit hitting the microphone. Long before the party meets the BBEG, they should be hearing stories. Tavern patrons whisper about them. Travelers share warnings. Soldiers tell stories around the campfire. And here's the important part. The stories don't need to match up. One person may say that the BBEG burned down an entire village. Another might say that the village was evacuated beforehand. A traveling merchant might call the BBEG a ruthless conqueror, while another might call them a liberator. Conflicting stories can create mystery. The players will start asking questions about who this villain is. The moment your players start discussing a villain amongst themselves, this has already worked. One of the most effective ways to build presence is to let the players see the aftermath. The party arrives in a village. The gates are broken. The streets are empty. People are afraid to say what happened. The BBEG isn't there, but the fingerprints are everywhere. Thank you for the high five, buddy. Maybe they passed through months ago. Maybe they passed through the day before. Either way, the players can see the consequences. This is environmental storytelling. Instead of players being told the villain is dangerous, they can see that the villain is dangerous. They can see the evidence that they have left behind: a corrupted forest, a ruined fortress, an entire region living in fear. The villain doesn't need to be present, their actions already are. Your villain shouldn't be doing everything personally. They have people working for them: generals, cult leaders, assassins, champions. These characters give players something tangible to fight while keeping the main villain in the background. But here's the key. Every lieutenant should reveal something about the BBEG. A disciplined military commander might tell the players that the villain values order. A fanatical cultist tells players that the villain inspires devotion. A cruel interrogator tells players how the villain treats their enemies. Think of every lieutenant as a piece of the villain's personality. The players are learning about the BBEG every time they fight one of their followers. I have a great example of this one. I think it's great to have very powerful generals because it shows that the BBEG is stronger than that, which can be terrifying to a player already. But I had a campaign where the villains were paladins, and this might eventually come back up later in an actual play campaign that I would love to do because I think it's just a really cool setting. But the villains were paladins. And the first time the players meet a general is the general asking them to bow down in devotion to the BBEG. And the players obviously refuse. Because why would they bow down to a BBEG they've never even met? And they're just being told that he's there to save the continent. So after some goading to the paladin downs a player and then downs another. And this group of paladins knock down the entire party. But the paladins, so the general tells the paladins to heal all of the players, and then he knocks them down again. He heals all of the players, pretty much tells them to stay out of his way. And that's the last I see of that paladin for a decent amount of the campaign until they end up having to fight him again and defeating him. And I think having the paladin being able to easily knock out a player at the beginning of the campaign made the players a little bit more afraid of that paladin. And because of that, they were way more afraid of his boss. Because if this paladin was able to take out the entire party, how strong could his leader be? And I loved that campaign. That was just a really fun one to play. Dreams are one of the most powerful tools a DM can use, because dreams don't have to explain anything. They just have to create questions. Maybe a player dreams of a black crown resting on a throne. Maybe they see a city consumed by fire. Maybe they hear a voice repeating the same phrase over and over again. At first, it doesn't mean anything. Then 10 sessions later, they find that throne, or they visit that city, or hear that same phrase again. Suddenly, the dream becomes important. Players love connecting clues, so don't use dreams to give answers. Use them to create mysteries. I love using a dream if it makes sense for the BBEG. You could have a BBEG that can invade dreams. I've done that in the past, where there's a villain that can just enter people's dreams, kind of warn them against moving against the BBEG. And I think that's a really fun thing to play around with. Eventually, your players need to hear the villain's voice. Not necessarily face to face, maybe it's through a magical projection, maybe through a possessed NPC, maybe through dreams like we just talked about, maybe through a sending spell. The important thing is the villain becomes a person. And when they talk, you don't want to make every conversation a threat. Threats are boring. Instead, let them challenge the party, tempt them, question their choices, mock their assumptions. Make the players want to argue back. Because the moment the players start debating the villain, you've created a relationship. And relationships make conflicts memorable. Like I said, I think this is a really fun one to do through dreams. You could have the players meet the villain in person and just have a full conversation. Curse of Strahd does this incredibly well near the beginning of the campaign. You just meet Strahd. And it makes Strahd a lot more menacing. So I love this one. One mistake a DM makes is saving the villain for the final battle. But players become far more invested when they've actually met them before. That doesn't mean the party should defeat the villain early. You could use that. There is an opportunity to have a villain that was a weak threat at the beginning of the campaign and then comes back much stronger at the end of the campaign for whatever reason. And it doesn't mean the villain should wipe out the party. Like I said, that's also an option. You could have the villain defeat the party. You could have the villain defeat the party and heal them. You could have them defeat the party dies, they come back somehow through like a God's will or something. There's a way to make a hook there if you want to. But instead, you could just create limited encounters. A chase through the city where they're trying to catch up to this villain. A brief duel. Maybe the villain teleports away during the duel because they just are bored with the players, because the players obviously can't beat them. A fight against a magical projection. The players think they're fighting a villain, but it's all just an illusion. Confrontation where the villain is pursuing a completely different objective. I think that one could be really fun. They're just there for something else. The encounter should end because the villain wants the encounter to end. Or because the players run away. If they get into a fight with the villain, it could be that they need to run away to survive the encounter. And the villain doesn't care enough to chase them because right now the players aren't a threat. I think this works really well early in the campaign when the players certainly aren't a threat. These moments create history between the players and the BBEG, and every future moment carries more emotional weight. One of the strongest techniques on this list is to let the villain defeat someone powerful. Have the villain beat someone the players respect. Maybe it's a legendary knight they've heard about for months. Maybe it's the kingdom's archmage. Maybe it's the party's mentor. Players understand strength through comparison. If an NPC everyone considers powerful gets defeated, players immediately understand the threat. And honestly, death isn't always the best option. Sometimes losing is worse. Maybe the archmage survives but loses their magic. Maybe the paladin loses their faith. Maybe the dragon flees in terror of this bigger threat. The point is to demonstrate the villain's power through action, not exposition. Players believe what they see. I've done this in that paladin campaign. The paladin's boss defeated a small god. So the party, one of the players knew this god. I don't think they were even a cleric. They just knew the god because they were from the same realm. So it was kind of like a not every gnome worships the god of gnomes, but every gnome knows about the god of gnomes kind of thing. And to show how strong this BBEG was, they see in the background of this massive fight that they're involved in, this BBEG fighting the god that the player associates with and eventually killing them. And that led to a very tense moment in the campaign where the players are seeing this character they've been chasing the entire campaign, this character they've been trying to foil since session 1, kill a god. And they're fighting minions. And they know that in this moment, they need to leave. They can't defeat a creature that just killed a god right now. So it becomes a chase to get to this portal to leave this battle, kind of thing. And it was one of my favorite moments of the campaign. I think it was just really fun to experience the party seeing something that they couldn't imagine being a possibility earlier in the campaign. At the end of the day, the goal isn't to make your villains stronger. It's to make them present. Your BBEG should feel like they exist even when they're off screen. The world talks about them. Their actions leave scars. Their followers spread their influence, and their victories reshape the story. By the time the final battle happens, your players shouldn't be asking, who is this villain? They should be thinking, we've been trying to stop this villain the entire campaign. And that's when the BBEG stops being just an encounter. If you enjoyed this video, let me know your favorite villain building technique in the comments. And if you have a BBEG that your players have been talking about years later, also let me know that story. I love a good villain. Other than that, guys, I hope everybody is having an amazing day. And until next time, peace.